Hi, how are you? You have an ID?
Your cell phone? No, I don't want to give it to you. Why do I have to?
Because my attorney said not to.
Why do I have to give it to you? This is evidence. She's under arrest. I have to go with. I have to go. I have to go.
Let me help you out, sir.
No, I have to stay. Please don't do this. Don't stay. You need to grab the bags. Take the bags. Yeah, and you need to wait outside. Okay.
My husband's almost 80 years old. He can't
Yeah,
come
I
with
can't. Please, can I go? No, you can't join me there. Oh, don't do this, please.
Please.
Oh,
Someone's
God.
got to help him get home. This is terrible. You can't do this. This is insane.
Hold on to that for me.
Is that okay with you?
Please. You don't have that with handcuffs on. She's not going anywhere. Please. Please.
Do you have anything in your pocket?
No, no.
Do you have anything of value in you?
No,
Does she have a necklace on? You
Wanna
can
go?
take the
My-
necklace
I'll
off.
take
Yeah, take it off. Yeah.
And the earrings.
And the earrings, the
You are listening to the Roberta Glass True Crime Report, putting the true back in true crime. From New York City, Roberta Glass is now on the record.
Okay, how is everybody? Today I am going to talk about something I found very interesting in Georgia Kappelman's closing argument in Charlie Adelson's trial. And she talks about the way that the conspirators talk and the way that they talk in flurries. So when there's an event like the bump, there is a flurry of communication through all the conspirators, and how the way conspirators talk in crime cases can take different shapes. For example, a wheel, she says, or in this case, it's like a train car. So one talks to the other bumper to bumper. So it's like a line of people. So Katie talks to Charlie, Charlie talks to Donna, and imagine sort of a collision, a rear end collision, right? Where everyone's bumping each other. And that's the way they communicate in this. And I found it very interesting. And I was also looking at Corbett's testimony, which I may go over again. And I'm sorry, I have it's like 80 something degrees in here. I'm going to turn off my air conditioner and see if I can sweat it out. I know it sounds like I'm in a tunnel. So I wanted to go over Georgia Kappelman's closing argument, not all of it, but from the points where she talks about Donna as a conspirator and the phone communication specifically, and starting with where Sigfredo and Luis were. And because the beginning of her closing argument is all about Donna and all the things that we normally think about when we think about this case. Donna's emails to Wendy, her suggestions to dress up the kids in SS uniforms, to baptize them into some form of Christianity, whether Catholicism or Christianity. I mean, take pictures with the kids in front of a church. And that's been so talked about. It's no less fascinating, but so talked about, that I really wanted to talk about the ways in which Donna is really locked in, and how is her defense going to get out of this? with her recorded phone calls and so many of the points. And this is why I think Charlie Adelson and Donna both hated her closing, because you can kind of skate by. Like, a news story sounds all right on the surface. And this is, if you followed my other work on innocence fraud, this is something I talk about. That if you can lie by omission or be like, oh, that somehow the investigators never investigated whether Charlie Adelson had been, whether this was done on spec and Katie was just the extortioner. Is that even right? Extortionist. But when you get to the details, when you know the details of the case, and this is something that the wrongful conviction movement, Innocence Project really exploits when they're getting out a guilty person, is to just rewrite history and just leave out a whole bunch of evidence and how it all fits into the other. Each piece of evidence all fits into the next piece of evidence. And so much of looking at this case is looking at common sense, using your common sense and saying, well, Charlie's story does not fit, right? The puzzle pieces, shout out to Rachbaum, don't fit when you're looking at the way that the conspirators talked and how they talked. So let's take a look at it, shall we? So Donna is mentioned 45 times in Georgia's closing argument, just to give you an idea of how integral she is in this case. And it's really like a wonder that she was a free woman for as long as she was. Okay. So take a listen.
She knew contained the instructions for the murder. Defendant advised Catherine Iriana that she should not touch the envelope or open it, as he had taken precaution to ensure that his prints and DNA would not be on it, that it would be untraceable to him, and she should do the same. She was to deliver.
Right. This is exactly right. Like, no DNA. And that seems to be such an argument right now. Innocence Project is trying to get this murder out, Marcellus Williams. And he confessed to a bunch of people, and the victim's possessions, in addition to having blood on his clothes, victim's possessions were all in his backpack. And his lawyers are just going on, they had some DNA tested, no DNA. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, the idea of a murder for hire is that you don't get your hands dirty, but okay.
Deliver the envelope to Garcia, and that's what she did. This is corroborated by Rivera, who says Garcia had a paper with him on the first trip, and it contained a picture of Dan Markel and a printed address. On the day of the murder, we have communications between our parties as listed here, with the red line representing the time of the murder. This flurry of calls between our persons of interest demonstrates the usual call pattern that we're seeing. Donna to the defendant, to Catherine Iriana, to Garcia, and back. We have Wendy getting a text message on the day of the murder about her TV repair appointment from her mother, Donna Adelson. It indicates that Best Buy is on their way over to help you with the TV sets in your living room. Maybe she didn't remember which TV was broken. At 8:20, on the day of the murder, Wendy texts the defendant, "This is so sweet." That text was deleted. What does it mean? At 9:19 a.m., there's a phone call between Wendy Adelson.
What do you think that text is about? I mean, if you had to guess, wouldn't you guess something like, get ready for your new life, you deserve it, something like that? Something along the lines of that. Maybe even something a little bit more vague. You deserve all the happiness in the world. Something like that. There's no sister I would have done this for. Help plan. There's no one better to plan a murder with than you, sis. Oh, it's so sweet, isn't it?
And this defendant that lasts about, 30 minutes? No. Like 18 minutes. So this is about 30 minutes before the murder when they hang up. They say they were discussing this TV that was not repairable. The TV that he gave her as a divorce present because it's cheaper than hiring a hitman. Only you guys can assess if you think that might just be a coincidence and nothing more. The Prius is at premiere at 9:16 a.m. The last phone communication between Garcia and Rivera is at 9:16. Afterwards, the phones turn off, consistent with what Rivera told you. We turned our phones off because we knew we were about to commit the murder, and they don't pop back up until, I think, about 12:30.
And what's interesting, she also mentions how Donna doesn't even look at during the bump. The paper comes folded over and she never looks at it. She knows exactly what it's about. That's going to come up at her trial. How is she going to defend that? I didn't know what it was about and I wasn't curious. I never looked. She just never unfolds the piece of paper, puts it in her pocket. And I've done an episode all about the TV where she says on the recorded calls with Charlie, the TV's about 5, which connects Wendy to it. So Wendy's really hard to get out of this line of conspirators. And you notice that she's illustrated as a conspirator because she is an unindicted conspirator, as is Harvey in this murder case.
The bus video catches them turning onto Benton Road to do the murder at 10:51 a.m., whereby they pull up right behind Professor Markel in his driveway. Sigfredo Garcia gets out of the Prius, approaches the driver's window, pointed his gun, and fired. Dan Markel raised his arm to protect himself, but it was no use. Professor Markel was executed at close range, whereby Garcia got back in the Prius and Rivera drove them away. Markel was left there to suffer and die. If not for James Geiger, there's no telling how many hours he might have suffered there alone and unaided. He fought for his life for 14 long hours before he finally succumbed to his injuries. The autopsy confirmed that he was shot twice at close range with a .38 caliber revolver, consistent with what Rivera said they brought as the murder weapon. Next, he was stripped, x-rayed, photographed, and dissected because he had become a piece of evidence. When Garcia and Rivera get back on the road, they're on a second bus video, leaving town at 10:55. That narrows the time of this shooting down to a 4-minute window between 10:51 when they're seen turning on to Benton and 10:55 when they're caught fleeing the scene. And then we've got the 911 call from Mr. Geiger at 11:01 a.m. The first phone call that either Garcia or Rivera make after turning off their phones to do the murder. So first call after that is at 12:30, and it's Garcia to Catherine Magbanua. Magbanua assures them.
So I just want to note that Dan Rachbaum has a petition out to keep the public out of the courtroom. He's like, of course the public has a right. We have open courts in America, and that's part of our right as American citizens to have open courts, except in special circumstances. But he talks about how disruptive the audience could be and how it could prejudice his client and it could distract the jurors. Look, this is the closing argument. Not only does he is a distraction, is my point. He should be, if anybody should be out of the courtroom, they're bringing up Dan Markel's autopsy photos. And for a minute, he looks a little bit ashamed. I don't know. I don't know if he's capable of shame, but the closest thing he had to shame coming over his face, and kind of looks down. Charlie Adelson looks like pale as a ghost, white, unhappy as can be as this is all going on. And then he starts texting. And Dan Markel's autopsy pictures are still up on the screen talking about his horrible death. What a model of sensitivity. I mean, if anything, he's prejudicing the jury against his client. Can't imagine if a juror noticed that, how disrespectful he was being. So, what I think about this latest PR stunt it's a PR stunt. They saw it work in Karen Reed's case to move it to a smaller courtroom. And I think it's just going to make it, I agree with Katie Kool-Aid, it's going to make it more of a spectacle. People are going to be waiting in line to get in. They did this with the Ghislaine Maxwell trial where people were buying line sitters, and even someone who got there at 3 or 4 in the morning, it was all filled up by 3 and 4 in the morning on a New York, in the middle of winter in the New York street. You're going to make a spectacle. It's going to be more crazy to make it a hot ticket to get in. And this has become a famous true crime case. You can't make it unfamous by sort of going to a small courtroom and saying, well, everybody can watch on court TV and there's going to be no ramifications. If anything, if he were really serious, he would ask about distractions, ask that people check their cell phones or not bring their cell phones or not bring computers into the courtroom, which is what we have in New York. You have to check your phones and your computers. If he was really so concerned about distractions. But here we have a call from Katie to Sigfredo, I believe.
That they'll get their money the next day. This is the same time frame, roughly, that Wendy Adelson was visiting the crime scene. Wendy indicated that she went to turn on a Trescott from Centerville Road, observed.
So as Sigfredo is saying you'll get your money the next day, that's when Wendy's visiting the crime scene. Somehow she knows it's done, but can't help herself and just wants to check, make sure. She knows that when the TV repairmen are on the way to her house, they're on their way to Tallahassee. They're one and the same. The Geek Squad, little did the Geek Squad know.
A roadblock and then turned around. But we learned that what she said happened could not have happened. Instead, the roadblock was all the way down here by the blue dot. I've got 2 blue dots. The one at the top left of the page there is where the roadblock was, that yellow line, 3 to 5 houses down from the scene. Trescott and Centerville is all the way down where the other yellow bar is. Visible from the roadblock that she approached and was observed doing so by Officer Brannon were multiple law enforcement vehicles, marked vehicles. There was crime scene tape up. There was a marked vehicle with an officer stationed at the perimeter. It was visible from that position that there was something going on at her kid's house, the house where they lived with their father. And what did Wendy Adelson do upon encountering this roadblock and observing that the police were present on the street where her kids lived? She turned around and proceeded to the liquor store to pick up her bullet bourbon. And the defendant says, well, this is another coincidence because she was asked to bring it to a party. Well, maybe. But the timing of the purchase and the fact that she went out of her way to go by the crime scene on her way to get the bullet bourbon should raise an eyebrow. But it's what she didn't do that's even more suspicious. She didn't ask Officer Brannon, hey, what's going on? She didn't call Danny. She didn't call the police to make any inquiries, or even the daycare to make sure her kids made it there that morning. Remember, Danny had her kids. She didn't even call the daycare. Meanwhile, our shooters are headed back to Miami. They pop up on an ATM camera at 6:45 p.m. in Pembroke Pines, Florida. And then both of their phones are consistent with being at Rivera's residence as of about 7 p.m. that night. At 8:23 p.m., Catherine Ivanova and the defendant make plans to meet up at his house. At 9 p.m., Donna texts the defendant, outside your house, to which he responds, 10 men. He told you from the witness stand that this text meant that Donna was just passing by his house on her way to Tallahassee and that they weren't meeting up. But Catherine Ivanova testified that when she arrived at the defendant's house, the defendant advised her that his parents had just been there, and then he thought his mom had physically washed the money, which was damp when Catherine Ivanova received it. Ivanova finds the defendant.
So these are all questions for Wendy. So what's interesting to me there is that Georgia is not saying there's been a lot of talk in conversations about people sort of on the peripheries of this case. People were friends with Dan Markel saying, I think it's Jared Ross, if I'm remembering right, saying, I know people who really got a Stock the Bar party and they were asked to bring that kind of bullet bourbon. She brought bullet rye whiskey. Wendy did, knowing nothing about it. But isn't it interesting that it's never been brought into evidence by the defense? It's one thing that she was asked to bring in that kind of whiskey. Never been brought into evidence. Isn't that odd? And there's Georgia going, yeah, well, maybe it was a coincidence. She's not going to even concede it. Like, oh, yeah, it was a coincidence. I know. Because I've talked, and she knows this case inside and out. So, and you heard how much Charlie complained about it. She drove by the crime scene. Bullet bourbon, it was just a coincidence. She just happened to drive that way. What is Donna's defense for this? It didn't work to just say it was a coincidence. In Charlie's trial, is he going to just try the same stuff? Where can they go? Let me know in the chat. What do you think, where they can go with this?
To be carrying his gun around and in a frantic state. About the time that these two are meeting up at the defendant's house to do the money exchange, Dan Markel is pronounced dead at TMH. So he says he's going to be about 10 minutes out. Here he is, hitting at home at 9:40 p.m. At 9:46, we see Catherine Ivanova, consistent with being at Rivera's residence, and then consistent with heading toward the defendant's residence. She turns her phone off, and it stays off for 11 hours. When Ivanovan's phone pops back up, it's 9:44 a.m. on Saturday morning, and she's headed back from the defendant's house, or the direction of his house, toward Rivera's residence. That's the money drop location. These phones are consistent with a meeting at 10:30 at Rivera's, which is the time, date, and place that he advised us he received his money from Ivanova. At 12:13 p.m., the defendant reaches out to Ivanova. Defendant, headed to the gym. Are you taking the kids to the beach? It's so nice. Ivanova, it's beautiful. Probably the pool. Defendant, Nice, have fun. Ethan must be happy. This is what he's texting Magbanua within hours of her leaving with all the money in his safe. All of the money that he stared at and loved on since he was a child. And he wants to know if she's going to the pool. This might be a good time to remind you that the jury room is not a place to check your common sense. We want you to bring it in there. You have heard two wildly different versions of how this thing went down, and they can't both be right. I mean, somebody's trying to sell you a bill of goods. You were selected with the belief that you would be able to cut through the garbage and make sense of the evidence in this case and render a verdict that speaks the truth. A major problem for the defense theory is the idea that the defendant and Magbanua broke up after the murder, but then grew closer together over the next 2 years as she was collecting his monthly extortion payments. This is one of the more unreasonable parts of the defendant's testimony, or well, it's definitely in the top 4, along with Latin King extortion payment plans, hitmen that hire themselves to kill someone that their intended future extortion victim hates. And most unreasonable of all is probably that Charlie Adelson, the guy that talks so tough in the hot tub about his unsavory connections, an arrogant man of extraordinary resources, a prize fighter of verbosity, would just lay down and take this in silence.
Right, in silence. So when people say, well, what is he going to testify? Why are they paying all this money to move him to Tallahassee to testify in Donna's trial? Is if Donna hops on to Charlie's defense and says, well, I was just paying the extortion because Donna's also all the checks come from her. She hired Katie, and our relationship got stronger, and Katie was extorting my son, and, only one I knew about it was Donna, not to tell Harvey. Till later, right? So he's going to have to get up, and this is why I think he's a prosecution witness. He's going to tell this story again. I don't think he's going to get up and tell a whole new story like Katie Magbanua. He's going to tell the same old story he told in his trial. And it's going to be just as ridiculous with these same pieces of evidence. So you're telling you got to have fun at the pool? I love how she ranks them, though. Ranks them in order. Personally, I think the payment plan is number 1 for me. I don't know. Charlie Adelson's personality might be 2 or 3, but the payment plan, the Latin King payment plan, that they were like, oh, we're extorting you, but you only have this much. We'll put you on a payment plan. No problem. There's no interest. A non-interest payment plan. No probs. And only that much. Because you're a dentist and you're not raking it in. You don't have properties all over Southern Florida. So ridiculous.
Let's review some of these love checks. We got that one. Then we've got July 22nd. They're talking about the weather. They're talking about prescription shampoo. On October 6th, the defendant says, I love you. It makes me feel good that you care about me. I'm very lucky to have you as a part of my life. What? Lucky? Lucky. He says, I love you again on 2/24/15. According to him, he's now been making payments for 7 months. He's had her on the payroll for 6 months. No Latin Kings have contacted him in any way about collecting his outstanding debt of $195,000. Yet he continues to pay and love on Catherine Magdalena without reservation and without the slightest suspicion that she might be in on this.
I mean, these are also great. The prescription shampoo was a nice touch. Tommy DV, do you have any predictions for Donna's trial? Well, I think there's going to be maybe one surprise. That I know something about. Maybe. I don't know if it'll come true or it will even come out, but I've heard something. A little bit about something that I can't talk about, but I think that it's going to be a lot of the evidence in Charlie's trial. I think I'm most interested to see how Donna behaves in court. I think whether she will be kind of very cheery or angry like she was in her first hearing. And I think the only hearing that she was in person, the only hearing that we've seen her in court, heckling her own lawyer. I doubt she would heckle Dan, though. I would expect some kind of surprise defense from the defense, but what it is, are they going to go with some new kind of defense? I don't know. I would think a lot of the same evidence, at least from the state in Charlie's trial. They have such a good, tight case as it is, the way it is. I think we're going to see Wendy again. I think we're going to see Jeffrey Lacasse again on the stand. I think Bossy Texas chick said she thinks it's going to be boring. I doubt that. I doubt it. But maybe she's right. But I doubt it's going to be boring. I mean, how are they going to make this fit? And with all these calls, what was she talking about? I think they're going to really hone in on the fact where she says it, when she talked to the undercover after the bump and said it wasn't me. They're really hone in on that. That's the best thing the defense has. Go to the police. But of course, she doesn't go to the police. And then they're still talking in code. And you'll see, this is what really interests me about this section of the closing argument.
And without the slightest concern for helping solve the murder of who killed his brother-in-law. Defendant says he believed Catherine Magdalena wasn't taking any of the money even after he put her on the payroll. Checks are going to her because she seemed broke. Defendant's explanation for all the love texts with Catherine Magdalena is that he felt sorry for her. He felt she was in the same position that he was in, being manipulated in the same way that he was. But the fact remains, folks, that she's taking his money. She's connected to the guy that's extorting him. She's connected to the guy that killed his brother-in-law. It defies logic that he would then proceed to grow closer with her. But he has to say that because he can't. There's no other way around these texts. It also defies reason based on what we know of this man, that he would take her for her word and just empty his safe into her purse and then keep paying, presumably forever, without asking any questions, talking about it all, or reporting anything to the police. Magdalena began getting checks from Adelson Institute 2 months after Markel's murder, and she continued receiving checks from that time frame up until the bump. The checks stopped happening at the time of the bump, and you should be asking yourself what that means. Why did the checks stop happening? Well, you would reasonably figure they stopped happening because the parties got spooked, because law enforcement, they suspected the bump could be law enforcement. Law enforcement might be getting closer, take her off the payroll.
The real question is Donna going to be forced to take the stand? And if she follows a defense that's very much like Charlie's, then the only one who can back up her story is Charlie. Something that, notice that she didn't do for Charlie. They were nowhere in the courtroom. They had already threatened they were going to take the fifth. if they were forced to testify. Charlie doesn't have that luxury, so he can only tell that story. But the prosecution, and I've done a whole episode on this, is so smart to take Charlie as their witness first. So destroy him on direct, destroy him on issues of credibility and believability before you can even back up Donna's story. But if she takes some kind of, I was just paying off I was just doing the paychecks for the Adelson Institute the way my son told me to do and went and stopped. It had nothing to do that they stopped when the bump came about. On the stand, it's going to be tough. She's smart. She's smart and she's strategic, just the same way Charlie Adelson tried to craft out his story backwards and forwards. And I believe Dan Rashbaum practiced as Georgia Cappelman with him over and over again, doing really intensive, difficult crosses with him. But he held up, but it still wasn't believable. And I love how he says he was likable. He wasn't likable at all. He came off as an arrogant and totally insensitive and full of himself and entitled and bratty. And I think that if Donna takes a stand, she's in danger of coming off a lot in the same ways as Charlie.
If defendant was being extorted, as he told you on the witness stand, why would the payment stop? Why would the extortionist care if other extortionists had jumped on the bandwagon? Why would the bump impact the defendant's existing obligations to the original Latin Kings? The defendant said he put her on the payroll at Adelson Institute at her request to help her get insurance for her kids, with the understanding that the money was being funneled through her to someone else and she wasn't actually getting any of the proceeds. She was just going to use that paycheck to assist her with getting subsidized housing or insurance, I think it was, for her kids. But you can see from this slide, which is dated June 24th, 2014, that she's texting him about getting on the payroll prior to this alleged first extortion effort. He says no problem at that time. This is between the first and second trips. She's asking to be on the payroll. So the explanation from the defendant about why she's on the payroll does not fit with the other evidence in this case. So we've got all this evidence that points to the defendant. The motive points to him. When we follow the money, it leads to him. The Prius eventually leads back to him through these conspirators. And each time we have a big event in this case, we see these call flurries where all the parties.
Okay, and she's just talking about the call flurries. So it was even better for Charlie to say the motive was Wendy's divorce, that he was brought into Wendy's divorce. And the good point, only point they could make really by the defense was to say, why would Charlie care about Wendy's divorce? Because most people can't imagine this much of an enmeshed family. But it is, but it's even worse for Donna. She has the motive. She wants those grandkids. She wants the life she envisioned for her daughter in southern Miami, not Tallahassee. I'm going to take a quick break and I'm going to play my new song I just wrote for Donna Adelson called Oh Donna. Check it out. I'll be back in a few minutes.
a stitch you're in. You plotted a murder, cause you wanted to raise your daughter's kid. Tallahassee is just a stop on the way to civilization. Miami is where all the fancy people are at. The TV is about 5. You can't get away from that. Two-toe, tay-toe, hoo-ho, you know the guy you pay, and you can't get away from that. Oh, Donna, what a stitch you're in. You thought jail was just for the little people, but now you're so blankets with the locked up crew. You're a grandmother in lockdown, and your one-way ride to freedom you blew. Oh, Donna, what a stitch you're in. Your family are exiled from the social circles you swam in. We all know you never made that banana bread or offered to babysit for dad, but you'll soon be making license plates and thinking about what could have been. Oh, Donna, you had to plan a murder.
Okay. That was my song written for Donna. I'm having some fun this summer. Writing some songs, music by AI. Someone asked about the date. This starts, I believe, September 13th. Do I have it right, guys? For jury selection? Let me know if I'm right for those that know in the comments. 17th. Oh, I'm ahead of the game. Okay. 17th. Thank you. Can't come soon enough. It's like Christmas morning, isn't it? Isn't it? Oh, please. Please. I just want to see the fancy lady. I just want to see the fancy lady on trial. I just made myself laugh. Your grandmother locked out. I mean, how many grandmothers do we see on trial? Not that often, right? Not of this class.
Are calling each other in that structure that I talked about. It goes from this one to this one to this one. But as the defense points out, these folks had independent relationships with each other that could explain those communication patterns. So without knowing the content, how could we know if they're really talking about the murder or if these call flurries around these key events are just a coincidence? A conspiracy can be shaped like a cluster with everybody talking to everybody. It can be shaped like a wheel with one central hub talking to all the different spokes. Or it can be shaped like a train car, which is what we have here, where one person talks to only the car in front of them and the car behind them. Law enforcement was asking these same questions. How is this conspiracy shaped? How does it work? How does information flow through it? What are different parties' relative roles within a conspiracy? And the wiretap and bump were designed to answer those questions. Did you notice that Donna Adelson, see how the paper's folded in half? She didn't even look at the paper before she put it in her purse. She didn't think this was a process server. She knew exactly what it was the moment this man approached. And then she just goes about her business. Does she give law enforcement this valuable information that could be used to solve the brutal murder of her son-in-law? I mean, this guy that approached her obviously knows something about who killed Dan Markell, right? So surely she went straight to the cops. Nope. Instead, she goes straight to this defendant, who goes straight to Catherine Natale, who goes straight to Sigfredo Garcia. In that first call after the bump, Donna says she doesn't want to talk on the phone, but defendant can't leave it alone. He asks, does it involve me or other people? Her answer, well, probably the both of us. Probably both of us. He says, what's that?
What do you think? Do you think Rashbaum's going to say, well, they didn't say it was a conspiracy of how many? Katie, Wendy, Harvey. She just said the two of us. So it's clearly they're not talking about the states, the state's case here, because that involves Wendy and Harvey and all these other people. This just involves the two of us. And at this time, I mean, if I were a lawyer, maybe I would go with that argument. At this time, the only thing that involves the two of us maybe is just this extortion plot that only you know about, right? Is that even an answer? I mean, all these things are so lame. Try to think. I'm just trying to think of a defense. She's so screwed. Not that I want her to get away with this. I just don't know where they're going to go. I mean, they can go the usual road, tunnel vision investigation. They never looked at anyone else. They never needed to look at anyone else because Sigfredo and Luis were caught right away, and Luis fessed up. Where are they going to go with coerced confession? That Luis Rivera's out of his mind and is under a delusion? Are they going to bring in Dr. Elizabeth Loftus or her husband, Jeffrey Loftus, like they did in the Maxwell trial and Weinstein and Tim Hennis and all these other cases of guilty people? Bill Cosby, Menendez brothers. I guess so many. Just say that somehow the investigators put a false memory into his mind. I mean, what are they going to do? Katie's coming back. She's an excellent witness. I knew she would be. Court TV and everybody were saying, oh, she's going to be terrible. She's a liar. And that's what they were counting on. The Adelsons, these people, they're not going to believe these low-life people. They're not going to believe the Latin King, and they're fighting to the state is to get any reference of his gang affiliation out. Don't know if that will work. Latin King and Katie. He's already lied. And first she denied it, and then she's telling a new story. Were they going to believe these witnesses? Yes. They both were excellent witnesses.
Probably the two of us. So you probably have a general idea what I'm talking about. He doesn't say, no, I have no general idea what you're talking about. He says, all right. He absolutely does have a general idea what she's talking about. And if they were innocent, as the defendant has claimed, and this was in fact a second extortion attempt, there is not a reason in the world why they wouldn't just say that. I got approached by another one. One came and paid me a visit today. It's happening again. In call B, the defendant asked Donna to take a picture of the bump letter and send it to him, and she refuses. Why? Are the Latin Kings going to see the text? Do you think someone is...
Great question for Donna. Charlie asked to see the paper from the bump, and she refuses. What is Donna going to say to that? I just don't know. I just don't know how to work my phone. I just don't know how to work it. I don't know how to send a picture over text. You can do that? Is that what she's going to say? What is she going to say? Please help me think of a better defense than what she has. Than just saying, oh, Charlie was getting extorted. There's got to be something better. Because she's going to get burned. I mean, I do always say that you can never predict the way a jury is going to go. Who thought that Catherine McBanaman's jury was going to hang? But it is a lot of circumstantial, really hard to explain away evidence all put together in this case with really unlikable defendants. Which is interesting because when those unlikable defendants come up and take the stand and tell the closest thing they can to the truth, they're very good. Isn't that kind of interesting? Like, who would like, I mean, Luis Rivera, not very likable. Katie, not very likable, but they're really good on the stand. It is kind of an amazing thing. And I think Donna is going to be, she's also very emotional in a way that Charlie's not. That could get to her. She could get really defiant and angry on the stand like she was at that first hearing. That won't help her.
Is trying to blackmail you? Maybe. Could be. I don't know. No. That's crazy. That's his response. And I'm not adding the emphasis on that syllable. He says it like that. That's crazy. How is it crazy? You're already being extorted by Lion King members. Remember, Doctor?
Doesn't Charlie look like a little kid that's been put into timeout? Like when you take away his toy? Doesn't he look totally like that? Look, wait, hold on. Let me just go back 5 seconds. Okay, just watch Charlie. Don't pay no attention to Georgia Cappleman. Just focus in on Charlie's face. He looks like that kind of really constipated face little toddlers make when you take away their toy and put them in timeout. Check it out.
Extorted by Lion King members. Remember, Doctor? It's because he hadn't come up with that part yet. In call C, defendant calls back again to tell Donna not to talk about things in the apartment or any place. Why? Why? The Latin Kings aren't in there. And she doesn't ask why, because it's obvious. She says, oh, obviously. Why? Because
I'm going to find this if it kills me. I'm going to go back. Where am I? 105. Bear with me, those listening on podcast. This is not the time to be listening on podcast. You got to see this. This face he makes right here. It's like, yeah, it's right around here. Okay, here we go.
are the Latin Kings going to see the text? Do you think someone is trying to blackmail you? Maybe. Could be. I don't know. No. That's crazy. That's his response.
Right there. Right there. Isn't that the face of a toddler? He's just been put into timeout and had their toy taken away.
I'm not adding the emphasis on that syllable. He says it like that. That's crazy. How is it crazy? You're already being extorted by Lion King members. Remember, Doctor? It's because he hadn't come up with that part yet. In call C, defendant calls back again to tell Donna not to talk about things in the apartment or any place. Why? Why? The Latin Kings aren't in there. And she doesn't ask why, because it's obvious. She says, oh, obviously. Why? Because they might be under surveillance? Well, who cares if they have nothing to hide? Here we see the first use of code on the wire. People don't talk in code if they've done nothing wrong. People do not talk in code if they haven't done anything wrong. Defendant knows I mean, he knows that fact, and that's why he told you we didn't talk in code on the wire. We spoke carefully. What does that mean? Careful of what?
Right. All this talk, don't talk on the phone. Why? Why? If it's about my extortion and, right? Why not talk on the phone if we have nothing to do with this? We have nothing to hide. Great point. Barb Armstrong, you have such a great channel, but I can't watch without CC. Please turn them on when you have a broadcast. Barb, it's YouTube. I do turn them on my end, and as soon as it's processed by YouTube, they can CC it. But when it's live stream like this, that's when you can't get CCs unless you want me to turn on. I can do that for you. I can turn on the closed caption for the video here, if that's what you mean. But for my end, that comes later when it's processed.
Defendant also told you under oath that he regrets that his mom randomly used the word TV in this call as part of her careful talk. The defendant got Wendy Adelson a TV as a divorce present as a cheaper alternative to hiring a hitman. Dan Markell was killed by a hitman. Then the same TV is Wendy's alibi for the murder, a service appointment that her mother set up for her from South Florida. And then on the wire, Donna says, quote, "This TV is going to cost about $5." Does the defendant say, what TV? What are you talking about, since you inserted a random object into this careful talk conversation? No, he doesn't need to ask what TV, because he knows exactly what she's talking about, and he parrots it back. They asked you for $5,000?
There again, it's all about Donna. 45 times she was mentioned in this closing argument. 45 times. How is she going to get out of that? What is she going to say? The TV was just about 5. I just said that because why? I was at work. Why couldn't she say $5,000? That's what they want. I don't know. I mean, I don't even think she could say she was at work. Half the time you hear her grandchildren in the background in these calls. Spookily, it's like Rosemary's Baby or something. Where is the defense? I mean, I know that Dan Rashbaum and Alec Morris are getting paid a lot, but where do they teach you in law school to come up with a defense with such a circumstantial case like this? I guess they can just pick, but pick at what are they going to attack the FBI? And I guess they could attack the transcribing of the calls, but I don't know if that's a winner. Try to poke holes in the state's case.
The defendant has advised you that this TV stuff is a coincidence. Is it a coincidence, or is it obvious they're referring to their conspiracy and this murder? Only you can decide which explanation is credible. The players in this case are smart. They've given a lot of thought to their preparations before this and to their explanations after. We know the seed was planted in early 2013, and it took over 1 year to come to fruition. And they really thought of almost everything. A clever TV-related alibi for Wendy, a frame job for Lacasse, and they insulated themselves by hiring Catherine McDaniel as a middleman, walling themselves off like those train cars, only communicating with the one in front and the one behind, and having no connection to the one further down the line. It's also important to note that in these first few calls, A, B, and C, that Donna Adelson describes the bump to the defendant, and she says the person that approached her mentioned an ex-girlfriend. But she does not say the name Katie or Catherine.
There's another question for Donna. She knows right away that it's Katie. I mean, I guess she could say, like, well, the only girlfriends that were gonna hang around someone like Tuto, Huho, Hato, I don't know what his name was someone like Katie. Whitney Kick was a lovely girl, a wonderful girl. She'll say something like that. She was wonderful. She was lovely, smart. Something like that. I mean, I guess she could go like with something like that. But immediately she knows it's Katie from the bump. Almost like they were all conspirators. Almost like it.
Then, with only this very limited information, defendant calls only one of his many ex-girlfriends, Catherine McVanois. In call D, defendant tells McVanois that he thinks that this undercover, the would-be extortionist, said her name. We know this is true. The undercover did say Katie, but Donna had not yet told the defendant that. They only communicated in calls A, B, and C. And the only communication on those calls was that the person mentioned ex-girlfriend. On the wire, the defendant says he just called Katie, Catherine McVanois, because she was his most recent ex-girlfriend. Well, we know that's not true because there's at least one woman that defendant will admit meets that definition between McVanois and the bump, and that's Whitney Kick. On the stand, he told you all that you might not be the right Katie conversation.
Did he say it, Janine, in person? Am I wrong? No, the bump guy said Katie's name. Janine, Crime Junkie, thanks for this comment, said Donna's name, but Donna did not say to Charlie. Oh, interesting. Okay, well, that's one for... Really? Right when he bumped into her, he said it? Is that right? Right when he bumped into her, Janine? Or was it later when, like, the second call? Said Katie's name. Okay. So, all right. That eliminates that argument. That's one for Donna there.
There's several mentions that, I'm not sure you're the right Katie. I apologize. I'll feel stupid if you're not the right Katie. That was designed to reassure her that he was not setting her up. Once defendant meets with his mother and gets the details and the paper with the undercover's phone number, he meets up with Catherine McVanois at Dolce Vita. If they had any evidence, we'd have already gone to the airport. Does that sound like an innocent man? Even if they bug your phone, you're still not talking about any of this. Talking about what? The cops would only bug your phone to get information about the murder. And if you don't have any, then there's nothing to not talk about. The cops aren't going to be doing a wiretap to investigate him getting extorted, which he hasn't even reported to law enforcement. So, not talk about what? Defendant discusses how he's going to start arming himself and is prepared to shoot. He told you under oath from the stand that he was being threatened and extorted by gang members for 2 years at the time that this recording was made. And now he's just starting to think about carrying a gun? Does this sound like a man that's been living in fear for 2 years? Does this sound like a guy who lays down and takes his lumps without question when threatened? Someone comes up to me asking for money in my house? He says that. Lines 23 and 24 on the top there. He says this as if it's a preposterous proposition that somebody would just walk into his house and demand money. But isn't that what happened to you? How How is that preposterous? But wait, what changed? On the next page, he says, yeah, and when guess what? When the fucking police show up and there's a doctor, there's an oral surgeon standing there with a dead gang member in his fucking driveway, they're not going to come down too hard on me. This is the same man who took the witness stand and swore under oath that he was a victim in this case, and that he had been too paralyzed by fear of gang members to come forward and report his victimization. Dr. Adelson on this recording is the real Dr. Adelson.
Right. I don't think that we're going to have any of that with Donna, are we? This is the real Donna? Again, unless you're going to point to the text messages as a motive. But, I mean, she's a little bit more polite, I guess you could say, to the undercover. She's pretty much Donna all the way through. She doesn't have this kind of public persona. I mean, she's going to get up and I guess she's going to sound a little bit like she sounds. You're right. It's actually thank you, Janine. You're right. It's actually something. I listened to this like 3 times. Georgia says in this, she says the name Katie to Donna. Thank you. Correct myself. So I don't think there's going to be any kind of Jekyll and Hyde argument in this.
On the stand, he was so controlled, so knowledgeable about his case, so practiced. But there is no way to explain away his statements on this recording. When the bump happens, you get to observe this defendant in action in his role as fixer, a problem solver. He's working those phones, trying to get Katie to investigate the bump and find out if it's legitimate or not, and also trying to reassure Donna that it's just the cops fishing and it's nothing to worry about.
And that's going to be a big argument. Why were you worried? You weren't in it. We weren't in it. We weren't a part of it, remember? Charlie, I wasn't in it. I wasn't a part of it. On the stand? You weren't a part of it. Why were you worried? Why didn't you go to the police? I mean, those are all going to be questions. And Wendy changing the kids' names. It's not going to go unnoticed by the jurors. I mean, it's an awful lot of, like I said, circumstantial evidence. And it's a story. The other story doesn't make sense. It's a story that makes sense. And whether Charlie and Donna want to say, well, that's why the dumb Tallahassee Hicks fell for the prosecution's unproven case with no evidence. Because it was a story, they made it into a Dateline TV show. But it's a story that fits the characters, that fits the evidence, that right all the way through from beginning to end. And it's a jaw-dropping story. When I wasn't familiar with this case till I interviewed Ruth Markel and read her book. And then I, listened to Over My Dead Body, and I just couldn't believe this story. These could be a family that I knew. This nice Jewish family with these really overachieving kids, and maybe like the middle child, the problem child. It'd be really interesting to hear about the relationships that Donna's had in jail. She's taken like a grandmotherly type relationship with the other jailmates, or has she kept to herself and been very snobby? Has she made friends with other women her age? Has she made friends with? What do they talk about?
The bump is an actual recorded example of how this defendant acts when he is threatened by a purported extortionist. And how he acts is the complete opposite of how he's telling y'all he acted in the first extortion. Number one, he does not stay quiet about the bump. He talks about it a lot. There are multiple calls with Donna and Katie discussing the bump and what the next step should be. Two, he takes action. There are multiple in-person meetings with his mom and with Katie and eventually with his dad too about the bump and what to do about it. Three, he investigates the bump. He asks questions. He enlists Magbanoa to find out who this is. He talks a lot about his concerns that this will not be just a one-time payment, but could turn into some ongoing problem. And four, he doesn't take it lying.
Right. Odd, because he doesn't seem to have problems with more than one-time payments. He seemed to like more than one-time payments. He likes to be put on a payment plan. He doesn't $5,000 seem so incredibly low with this crazy inflation we have now? Doesn't it seem laughably low? Dean Walker, thanks so much. Thanks for keeping the channel afloat. I appreciate it.
Down. He threatens Nazi shit if these people think they can threaten his family and get away with it. He suggests that the problem might require an additional murder. Quote, if he can't do it, I'll find someone else that can. Number five, he's suspicious. He does not blindly accept the representations of this purported blackmailer that approached his mother. It's clear from the Dolce meeting that he doesn't fully trust Katie. He certainly doesn't trust this purported blackmailer that bumped into his mom. The person that represented themselves, the person that approached his mom represented himself as a Latin King gang member, right? I'm a brother of this guy that I met in Broward or whatever. And he's demanding money from her. Yet, the defendant does not take his word for it that he's a gang member. He's not so in fear for his mother's life that he opens the safe and gets $5,000 more out and gives it to Katie. A pittance compared to the amount he's telling you he handed out to the first layer of extortion. Number six, he doesn't pay. He doesn't bring the $5,000 to Dolce and give it to Katie and say, go pay it. Because that's what I do when I'm threatened, I pay. He doesn't pay, he doesn't ever pay. And it's only $5,000. Instead, he analyzes and thinks through and talks about every possible scenario. Defendant says it's one of two things or one of two scenarios. One being the cops, two being someone actually trying to blackmail his family about this murder. According to him now, he's been blackmailed for 2 years. And he's talking to Catherine Magbano. He's talking to the person that's been collecting his money all those months. But at no point does he acknowledge the first extortion in the Dolce Vita meeting. Why not? Oh, because she asked me not to talk about it. Well, times have changed. There's a second extortion effort now, and they're approaching my mother. You think I'm not going to mention the first extortion? Your people have been running their mouths, and now they've tracked down my mother. You need to go get this under control. Nothing like that. Next in the Dolce recording, defendant begins to explain how to prove a crime. The police have to put the person at the scene, not just in the car. He's reassuring her that even if we, law enforcement, can tie her or the shooters to the Prius, that we'll never be able to charge them. Because they didn't come to Tallahassee, they didn't shoot anyone, they didn't do anything wrong, and therefore they can't be held accountable. But that is not the law as the judge has instructed you. Everyone who wanted this done and did some act toward accomplishing it is guilty as the one that pulled the trigger. He's also telling her that even if Rivera has run his mouth to this would-be extortionist, his word alone that, hey, if he goes to the cops and starts singing and says, hey, Rivera told me he did this murder, that's not going to be enough. Basically, I can't use the word hearsay, but that's not going to be enough to proceed on an arrest in this case. This person knows information. So Katie, they'll be back. Whoever it is knows information. Information about what? You had nothing to do with it. Remember that, doctor? You've been extorted and that hasn't been reported. What information do they have? You mean information that could be used to solve the murder of your former brother-in-law? If so, why wouldn't you want those people to go to the cops? Why wouldn't you want them to come forward with that information? Then the guilty parties will be held accountable. Your extortionists will be jailed without you having to do or risk anything. Next, defendant talks about what will happen if the would-be extortionist, the undercover, is picked up by law enforcement. Next thing you know, this person is singing. Other people start singing. As soon as they have him, he starts calling your name out, and then there's going to be police at your door and at my door. If you're innocent of this murder, why are you worried about the extortionist telling law enforcement whatever it is he knows about the murder of Dan Markell? Defendant says he wants to pay the money. Oh, got ahead of myself. He wants to pay the money, but he's explaining to her the problem with paying is that people might keep coming back or tell their friends.
I want to give him the money, but I don't want to get involved. I would think that all this stuff is going to come into Donna's trial too, but who knows?
Who will jump on board as well. He's explaining to her the problems with paying a potential extortionist. What he doesn't say, which is what you would expect if he'd been getting extorted for 2 years, is Garcia or whoever you've been giving my money to has obviously been running their mouths and now they are messing with my mother. Next, he gives instructions. Say my friends have no idea what you're talking about. And frankly, I don't know what you're talking about, but the name sounds familiar of who's incarcerated. So I'm going to give you something as charity to help the less fortunate. But do not contact these people again or they're going to the police. The whole time you're talking, just say, I don't know what's going on. Only use the words help and charity. This isn't the guy described in this first extortion who just rolled over when threatened. He's in control. He's giving the orders. He's giving instructions. Why would you have to give instructions to a blackmailer about how to handle a blackmailer? Next, the defendant says, now he's fucking with his wife and he's fucking with him. And you fuck with the king himself, you better kill him because he's going to be a big problem. And he knows who you are. If he can't do it, I'll have someone else do it.
Isn't this amazing that they were going to solve their problem with murder? I mean, would this be another kind of, keep mentioning her, but Dalia DiPolito problem where they're going to have to come in and stop basically a murder? And has anyone seen that movie, Hitman, on Netflix? where it's based on a true story of a professor who becomes a hitman for hire. And he talks about how naive people are, that they think you can just hire hitmen like it's a profession. Who is going to do this? He couldn't. Sigfredo was long gone. I mean, who is he going to get to do this? Luis Rivera, I mean, already in prison. I mean, who in his stable of people was going to do this murder to the undercover cop? I mean, is that the way the Adelson family was going to go? Kind of like Robert Durst, just like one murder on top of the other murder to cover up the first murder? Anyone who got wise was just going to be knocked off?
Defendant testified that this means the only way to stop Garcia is to kill him. He's not talking about killing him. He's just saying he's a really bad dude, and that's the only way to kill him. The evidence shows that he's saying if Garcia can't handle the undercover, he'll get somebody else to do it. Then he says, and so help me God, they fuck with my family, it's gonna be fucking Nazi shit, because this will be done. I mean, Katie, I don't care what I spend, okay? I swear to God. Defendant and I went back and forth on the stand about what Nazi shit might include, and I think we.
But isn't it interesting that he doesn't care what he spends to kill this person? But he only has $3,000 for the extortion a month. That's what I could afford. That's within my budget. I have Christmas club I'm saving up for. I mean, what is he? It's so absurd. It's so absurd that they wouldn't take everything you had and more. They would have wiped you out. They really wanted to threaten you, threaten your life, and take money. They wouldn't be taking $300,000. They would have wanted it all of it. Your go-kart, your boat, your jet skis, maybe even a piece of the dental practice. Who knows what they would have taken everything, all your properties, everything, liquidate everything, taking it all. Oh yeah, just $3,000. She knew I had that in cash, but I only had to pay out $3,000 a month. I mean, come on. So absurd.
We ultimately agreed that that would be killing. And then he says, I don't care what I have to spend. If you're struggling to figure out who this man is, that's a good clue right there. He's going to buy a solution to this problem exactly how he paid for a solution to the problem of Danny Markel. Here he wants to know if Garcia has any bad feelings toward him, meaning, is Garcia willing to look into this and handle this for me? Or does he still hate me because I used to date you? If defendant had really been getting extorted all along, surely he'd say something like, I've been paying all this money, I've been compliant with everything. Can you get him to look into this and figure this out? Katie, I'll go to the moon and back for you. Why? Because she did something big for him, and he's going to be indebted to her for the rest of his life. Not because he feels sorry for her, not because she's his protector. He's the protector. He'll go to the moon and back for her because they're neck deep in this conspiracy together. Somebody messes with her, they mess with him. Somebody messes with him, they're messing with her. It's the same thing. Here he's demonstrating an understanding of, a rational understanding of how blackmail works. His example is that you could blackmail someone that's cheating on their wife, meaning you blackmail someone that you have dirt on. You don't go kill somebody and then go up to an innocent person and say, I killed your brother-in-law, give me money. At the end of the conversation, defendant says, you know who this is coming from? Inside. And then I don't have a slide for this, but he goes on to talk about what he will do for her. I don't have to sit here and tell you what I would do. I show you what I could do. You know what I'm saying? You know how I am. I look for things to do. You don't ask me for shit. Didn't she ask you for $138,000 and then a payment plan and then another $195,000? You don't ask me for shit. I look for things to do for you. Is that a statement that would be made to his blackmailer, or at least the woman that's taking the money?
But how is she going to get out of? I mean, I really wanted to talk about the calls and how she's locked in with all these calls and just the conspiracy and just how poor Charlie Adelson's defense is. And she's really, I think, locked in, unless they're going to say, forget it. Charlie was lying. Knowing he's going to be a witness, he was lying. Had nothing to do with it. This is a whole brand new story. I mean, Rachbaum would do something like that. Give us a whole brand new story that somehow fits in with the evidence, that he can puzzle piece in with the evidence that still doesn't fit. But I mean, look, I mean, Charlie Adelson is just like rubbing his face, can't believe it, because she's explaining to the jury how the entire conspiracy worked from beginning to end, what every piece of evidence means. And that is, so I wouldn't say that cases are won in closing, but when you can wrap up all these pieces of evidence and just, and in a way, maybe she was spoon feeding it to the jury. Why not? Unravel it all, not leave anything, not make anything subtle, unravel it all and say, this is what it all means. This is what it all suggests, that this happened. This is how it went, how we think it went down. This is our theory of the case. And I guess if you're Charlie Adelson, you can argue, I was so upset because it was so out there and wrong. But I would argue that they got it, they nailed it on the nose. And this is what they're going to do for Donna. When she says they mean the two of us, TV's was just about 5, and it nails Wendy. And if this is just as big a trial as Charlie's trial, if nothing comes up that's bigger in the second half of September, and the public tunes in, then the public is going to be demanding that Wendy be next, which I think Georgia is prepared for. And so on today, it depends on my mood and my day, whether I think Wendy, it's going to end with Donna or whether they're going to go on to Wendy. But today I'm feeling very confident that Wendy has to be next, that the public will not rest until all the Adelsons, and I don't think Harvey, although I do think he was part of this, I just don't think he was so hot-headed they left him out of most of the planning. But his money was certainly behind it. And there's that call from Sigfredo, which I don't believe was a mistake. I really would love to interview Georgia Kappelman when this is over and get her feelings on that call, which they make up I think it's a made-up story about the jet skis. It changes. Someday I have to do just a episode just on that story, on the jet skis and the way that he went up after just hating him from afar and never saying anything, to getting up in his face when he's in his car and he has to make like some kind of crazy turn with jet skis or backing up with jet skis, right? Because he's so mad at Charlie Adelson, Sigfredo is. He comes out yelling at him, and then he calls Harvey, I believe, at home, which I think it's his cell number. Am I wrong on that? Correct me if I'm wrong. But to me, that seems like Sigfredo's like, he's going to talk to the boss, who was Harvey, the money guy. That's the way I see it, but I don't think he was looking for Charlie. I would love to know what that call is about and what Georgia thinks that call is about.
To the blackmailers. These are just a selection of the incriminating quotes on this Dolce Vita recording, and I know it's a struggle to listen to it. You will have the recording, not the transcripts, but you'll have all the audios. The transcripts are just demonstratives, they don't go back. But you can kind of hunker down and listen as much as you can to get what you can out of that Dolce recording, because it is full of gems, and you can probably think of 10 more arguments than the ones I've just tortured you with today. In the initial recordings, the defendant and Magbanua seem to be kind of dancing around the issue, right? Nobody ever speaks directly. He can't know for sure at this point that she's not involved in the extortion effort or possibly wearing a wire, and she can't know for sure that he's not wearing a wire. So they're both just feeling each other out in the first several interactions after the bump. But those are the best stuff before they start to figure out, okay, we really think this is law enforcement. After the meeting with Magbanua, defendant calls Donna and tells her he had coffee with a friend and gave her some good relationship advice. Now remember, he's not talking in code. He assures Donna repeatedly that it's being handled and there's nothing to worry about. Then we hear in call H, the call where Magbanua calls Garcia and he's really angry. And she needs him to call that number to figure out who this is and to deal with it. Ultimately, Garcia says he will take care of the problem. The less she knows, the better. And then he tells her to stop talking about it on the phone and hangs up. Then we go to this.
I love how she stops for water in the middle of it. So who just said this? Kathy Barella. Sigfredo was just getting his life together when he was arrested. He had a regular desk job and thought things were going good for him. Isn't that interesting? But when he was found with cocaine on him, and he was fleeing to Mexico. Wasn't he? He was fleeing out of the country. That's often little reported part of his. They thought he was on the run, the way he was arrested. Little talked about, little reported. But I'm sure he regrets this. I'm sure everybody but the Adelsons who still probably think it was a good thing that they did this, regrets being a part of this. Okay, just a few more minutes.
That's that.
So we're talking about Donna and the call to Charlie where he talks about talking with Katie, assuring her that he's talked to Katie and told Katie had to deal with law enforcement, that this is just law enforcement. Don't worry about it. Calmed her down. Gave her a lot of good advice. Wink, wink. Look at Dan Rashbaum. Not the model of confidence there.
And then we've got the real struggle over the phone number. The point of this is that this number was handed to Donna. The number goes from Donna to Charlie, to Katie, and now to Garcia. Here in call J, we hear the reference to investment as code for the $5,000 extortion payment. A good investment would be someone who really does know something, not somebody that's just fishing, and will agree that 5,000 is going to handle it. You're going to go away, you're going to be silent about whatever you know, 5,000 is going to do it. A bad investment would be someone who's just read the papers and decided, hey, I'm going to try this, a law enforcement officer, or somebody that's going to take $5,000 and then just keep coming back for more and more and more and more, and it'll be a continuous problem. This is a composite slide of all the places in the recordings that are in evidence where the parties express concerns about the details that the undercover had. It's getting too detailed. He's coming up with a lot of fucking details, etc. It's obvious they're analyzing the legitimacy of the undercover and assessing how much of a threat he is based on the quantity and the quality of the details that he has about the killing of Dan Martel.
Right, and you're not worried unless they have the details correctly. Again, another problem for Donna. This was all wrong. If nothing happened, you wouldn't be worried about the details. Oh, does my son worried about details? I didn't worry. Me, the domestic coordinator. I don't worry about details. Details? I don't worry about details. I'm a very laid back kind of person with a terrible stomach who doesn't sleep when this stuff happens. I mean, what is she going to say? I mean, she doesn't take, I mean, maybe they don't put on a case. Maybe that's, I mean, as I told you, I was just a juror in a criminal case, and I felt that the defense would have been better. There was one witness for the defense, and it was the defendant. And this was a essay of a minor case, really awful, from like 4 to 8 years old case. It was 11-1. Okay, that was the vote we got back, first vote in the jury room. And I felt better. I felt like they would have done a better job had they never put on a case. So many of the jurors felt that, including myself, that what sunk the defendant ultimately was like the tipping point. There gets to be a tipping point in every juror, because as a juror, the person's in front of you the entire trial. Gave me a lot of insight. You're really looking for anything, any bit of reasonable doubt to vote not guilty on. And it's hammered every time you get up to leave, to not make up your mind. You're really, really keeping an open mind. But there is a tipping point in your gut. And that tipping point came when the defendant testified. And I would think in this case, when Charlie testified, and if Donna testifies, it will be the same thing. It will be the tipping point, the straw that just puts everything in line. So they may be better not putting on a case. Looks like they're deposing everyone and their mother, though. Who knows what will become of that? We know that Rashbaum's done depositions before Charlie's trial too, that never came of anything. So
then you've got more property and listing code talk, more concern that the blackmailer might try to increase the amount. Here's a composite slide illustrating all the different calls where the defendant expresses concern that if he pays, that might not be the end of it. And the reason why I think this is so important is because you've been paying for 2 years. Why are you analyzing how blackmail goes or might go so much? You're supposedly an expert in it. Here, defendant gets stern with Captain Magdanoa, telling her to find out who the F it is and stop playing their games. Again, for a guy that's living in mortal fear of Latin King gang members, he's pretty cool. He's pretty in control. Recall that in this one call, she basically says, I can't, she's really furious in this call. And she's like, I can't do all this code anymore. I can't talk in code. Remember, defendant told you he didn't talk in code on the wire. So she breaks character here in this call, BB. The defendant later says to her, the quote I already gave you about how they're in this together. They're one and the same. And I couldn't agree more with that statement. This slide is a composite of all the places where defendant says if he had information about the murder, he would collect the reward money. First of all, whichever side of this case, whichever theory you're finding credible, both sides agree that the defendant knew the whole time who killed Dan Markel, or close to the whole time. So definitely could have gone and gotten the reward money, although it's hard to imagine he would collect reward money for information about the death of his own loved one. Defendant claims he doesn't go to the police, period. And he offers an example of I had a jet ski stolen and I didn't go to the police. Well, maybe the insurance was worth more than the trouble with the cops. I don't know. But he has gone to the police before. There was evidence of that. And the evidence shows that when somebody messes with him, he comes at them with everything he has. On the lawsuit with Ryan Fitzpatrick, the incident with his child's mother, incident with an old roommate, incident with a former female employee, some of those included reports to law enforcement. Some of them included use of other resources. In the last case with the female employee, he sent a letter that said, you know, he accused her of trying to shake him down. So she's trying to extort him. And it states that he would never pay her a dime. In fact, I'm going to get attorney's fees. He's a guy with considerable resources, and he's not a shrinking violet. He is not afraid to use those resources to his advantage. If some street thug...
Right. So why didn't Donna Adelson use her resources? I know she said she talked to 10 people that she knew about the undercover bump. I know she said she was going around her gated community or whatever in Miami to all her friends and asking about it. Doubtful. Love to depose them. Love to depose some of these friends that she talked to the bump about. They all felt she had nothing to worry about, but she's no shrinking violet either, excuse me. I think that the question for the jurors is going to be the same question Robert Adelson had. Why are the Adelson family so not curious about what happened to Dan? And when they do know, if Donna's going to go with Charlie's story, they don't go to the police. And then they don't tell Wendy. This is the first she knew of it. She walks into court in Charlie's trial. I learned something today. Anybody remember that? Me too. And the defense is trying to keep out Donna going to the airport. Let's use Rachbaum's euphemism. Donna visiting the airport, having a tour of the airport with her memento of the one-way ticket to Vietnam, a non-extradition treaty country. Of course they want to keep that out. I don't think they'll be able to. I think any judge keeping that out, that would be a hard thing to keep out. It's so integral. It's so speaks to consciousness of guilt and fleeing. I think a judge would have to be crazy to keep it out. Because we saw from the prosecution, they want to put in all of her searches for non-extradition treaty country, all the plans that she made to go to Vietnam, everything she was getting done beforehand, locking things up, putting the keys in other people's hands of the properties they owned. So if that doesn't come in, it'll definitely shorten the trial for sure. But I can't imagine. I don't know. Lawyers out in the audience? Anyone? Is a lawyer? Weigh in?
Was trying to push him around. Do you think he'd lay down and take that without doing one thing about it? This slide is a composite of some of the occasions defendant mentions the option of going to the police. And these quotes are specifically in reference to him saying, if you're threatened, you go to the police. if you're threatened, you go to the police. And he has done that before, but he did not go to the police in this case. He didn't go to the police in 2014, not out of fear, as he would have you believe, but because he did this crime. He believed he had gotten away with this crime. He didn't go in 2015 because he was busy that year having the best year of his life. Financially, got in a serious relationship with a new girl, June Mchinda, cruised the intercoastal in his boat. This dude had solved the problem. Everyone was happy. Wendy and the boys were back in South Florida where they belonged. Mom was happy. He was making money hand over fist. June described the beginning of their relationship. June Mchinda described the beginning of her relationship with this defendant in October of 15 as a fairy tale. He is not sweating anything, folks.
Right. It was like a fairy tale. And later, the only problem with him was that he's an accused murderer or alleged murderer. I don't know exactly the word she used. It's on a thumbnail of mine. Yeah, the only thing wrong, he's such a dreamboat. The only thing wrong with him is he's a murderer. Besides for his tourism trips to Vietnam to meet with girls under the age of 18, sounds like. Those things, and his complete hatred of women, leave that out. Melanie says Rachbaum is smelling his fingers the entire time. So gross. Did he forget he was filmed? Now, if I were more of a business lady, I would create a cologne eau de Rashi, and it would smell like Rachbaum's fingers. Like maybe smell the smell of the puzzle pieces. Once you put the puzzle pieces together, I like to wear the Rashi cologne. Smells like cigar smoke and poker tables, I guess. I don't know. Yeah, he always does that. He's really unaware and rude during George's closing. Just going to play a few more minutes of it. And then she's off of pretty much Donna for the rest of it. But do you see how much includes Donna in this?
And that continued until the time of the bump in this case in April 2016, whereby the defendant became agitated, angry, and anxious. This was before the report concerning him was leaked. At the time of the bump, his behavior changed noticeably. June noticed it, and Ryan Fitzpatrick noticed it as well. He was erratic. Now, why on earth would he be more stressed out after his extortionists were arrested? He seemed perfectly fine to these witnesses when he would have you believe he was in fear for his life. And then he further told you that he was more nervous after the arrest because he feared he'd be falsely arrested. Why? You didn't do anything wrong, you're not going to get arrested. Now, yeah, after the report gets leaked, okay, but why are you so nervous before that? Or were you a hot mess because you knew that we were getting closer? Here's Catherine Magbanua and the defendant discussing if the undercover could be someone who's trying to be an informant. An informant for what, if not the death of Dan Markell? He's not going to be an informant on the defendant getting extorted, a crime he has not reported. Here they're talking about whether the undercover is getting his information from the inside or the outside. The inside meaning someone within the murder conspiracy, someone on that board, or the outside, somebody that one of those people told. Magbanua says it can only be one of two, apparently. If somebody's that desperate, not from the inside, because there's too much from the inside that the person knows from the outside, so they won't risk it. That's why I know for a fact it's not from the inside. And then Adelson says, it's somebody not from the first layer, but probably the second layer. Yeah, and they just made a big mistake, she says. As the wire goes on and the defendant proceeds to continue to analyze the additional bump efforts that law enforcement makes, that text message, the letter, the call to the Adelson Institute, He becomes increasingly confident that this would-be extortionist is an undercover agent. And then after listening to Donna's call to the undercover, he is completely sure of that. And you have never seen anybody so elated to be under investigation by the FBI for first-degree murder. Consider this in light of defendant's assertions that he was acting strangely after the bump because he was worried about being falsely arrested. To the contrary, he doesn't seem worried at all. He seems thrilled. I think he says it's fantastic in one of these calls. I want to turn briefly to your jury instructions. The defendant is charged with conspiracy to commit murder, solicitation to commit murder, and first-degree murder. Why all three? Because the defendant didn't just ask Catherine Magdalena to do this and promise her money. He didn't just set a plan of action in place toward doing it. It got done. It got done.
And exactly the same for Donna. It's a good place to leave it with Donna. She put it into action. She had the motive. Look at her text messages, her emails. Listen to her undercover calls. She put this in motion. She used her son. She talks about how being cursed, but she used her own son to get this done. She brought her son into this. I mean, it's really, we talk about this being a Shakespearean tragedy. I mean, really. This is why I say there's just no consciousness. I was listening to, what was it, STS? And they were talking about Donna doing this for the love of her children. There's no love. This is not love. There's no love of her children with Donna. These are antisocial, psychopathic personalities. There is no love. There is no connection. There's just an infinite void and boredom and need to control. But this was not done for the love of her daughter or the love of her grandchildren. She saw Dan Markel as a zealot and a danger. And what she said Dan Markel cared about the most was control. What did Donna want the most? Control. But I don't understand where Joel Waldman's going with that. And I was surprised no one on the panel was like, excuse me? Excuse me? Love. She did this for the love of her daughter, like it was some sacrifice by Donna to do. And this was entirely done for selfish reasons. So I am going to read a victim impact statement. Okay. This is written for Charlie Adelson's case. Dear Judge Wheeler, we attended Harvard Law School with Dan Markel over 20 years ago. And if it were not for him, we might have never gotten married to each other. He brought us back together after we had split apart. Hold on one second. Let me make this a little bit bigger. And we have stayed together ever since, now blessed with 2 children. Bringing people together was only one of Dan's many mitzvahs, good deeds, as we are sure you will be reading about from friends, family, and colleagues. He regularly called us and emailed us and took the time to visit us in person, even after we moved across country to California. His murder was shocking and something we still think about a lot, even after so many years. He was a most memorable schoolmate and loving friend, and the least deserving of a deliberate, calculated death. Below are pictures of the three of us celebrating Ted's 26th birthday during law school in the fall of 2000, when Ted was joking about turning 62 instead of 26. Dan will never enjoy another birthday. In fact, last year, he also missed his eldest son, Benjamin's bar mitzvah, a major religious and cultural milestone that would have meant so much to him. As we celebrated our own child's bar mitzvah last year, we thought to ourselves, Dan would have loved to celebrate our milestone with us too. An additional note from Giselle. I was newly pregnant with our second child when I heard the news of Dan's death in July of 2014. It hit me so hard that I was shaking and sobbing off and on for months. I grieved privately so that our older child, then age 5, born within months of Dan and Wendy's older son, Benjamin, would not see me crying. Because I knew that I couldn't even begin to explain what had happened. How do you explain a murder like this to a 5-year-old? I would hide and cry, hide and cry. I would try not to think about it, then it would come back and hit me. I sometimes worried that the intense grief would cause a miscarriage. I was terribly sick with nausea during the pregnancy, and to this day, whenever I think about Dan's death, I am hit by the same waves of nausea. We will never have Dan's loving, smiling face back, so all we can hope for now is justice. That's what I have for today, guys. Please hit the like, share, subscribe, become a member of this channel. I'm going to do a member-only episode soon. Thursday, I'm Patty from Patty's Playhouse is coming on to talk all things Adelsons. I will see you tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern. Have a great night, everybody.